Look at the photograph. A girl, bare feet, cotton mill, Lancaster, South Carolina, 1908. She is 48 inches tall, which is shorter than the spinning frame she is operating. Her name is Sadie Pfeifer. She is 8 years old. She has been on shift for 11 hours, and there are 3 hours left, and the foreman is somewhere behind her with a leather strap he calls the persuader. The photographer, a man named Lewis Hine, has 30 seconds to get the shot before the floor boss throws him out. He gets it. The shutter clicks. Sadie does not look up. Sadie cannot look up. The machine does not stop for tourists. This is the photograph you were never supposed to see, because you were sold a different picture. You were sold Jay Gatsby in a white linen suit, raising a champagne flute over Long Island Sound. You were sold Vanderbilts in Newport, marble staircases, gold leaf on the ceilings, Tiffany lamps glowing like captured sunsets. You were sold the Gilded Age, and somewhere along the way, you forgot what the word actually means. Gilded isn't gold. Gilded is the thinnest possible coat of gold paint, brushed over rotting, cheap, soft metal. Mark Twain coined the term as an insult. A century of historians flipped it into a brand. Pull the paint back. Look at what's underneath. Underneath is Sadie. Underneath are 1.75 million American children under the age of 16, working full-time by the year 1900. Not after school, not summer jobs. 60 to 72 hours a week by federal census count in mills and mines and canneries and glass furnaces. In some southern textile towns, 1 in every 4 bodies on the factory floor belonged to someone too young to read the contract their father signed. You wouldn't put a child of that age in a public school today without supervision. They were putting them inside running machinery. Stand on that floor for a second. Smell it. The cotton lint in the air is so thick it coats the inside of your nose like wet flannel. You'll be coughing it up, grey and stringy, for the next 40 years, until your lungs finally close up entirely, and the company doctor writes natural causes on the certificate. The windows are nailed shut to keep the humidity high, because dry cotton snaps and snapped cotton costs money. The temperature on the floor is 104. The leather belts driving the looms are slapping overhead at a sound like artillery, and somewhere down the line, the girl who used to work your station is missing 3 fingers, because the machines have to be cleaned while they are running, and small hands fit between the gears. Welcome to the American dream. Mind the gears. Here's the deal. For the next 40 minutes, you are going to descend, floor by floor, layer by layer. You are going to leave the cotton mills, and you are going to crawl down 300 feet into the Pennsylvania anthracite, where the 8-year-olds breathe coal dust until they cough black. You are going to step over molten glass in the Indiana furnace houses. You are going to shuck oysters at 3 in the morning in a Mississippi cannery with hands that haven't healed in 2 years. And then, and this is the part nobody films, You are going to walk into the courthouse and the marble-floored boardroom and the United States Supreme Court itself, and you are going to meet the men in press suits who looked at all of this, looked Sadie Pfeifer in her 8-year-old face, and decided the machine had more rights than she did. 5 layers down, each one worse than the last. Take a breath. While you still have the lungs for it, take that breath. Hold it. Because the first floor down is the easy one, and you're already going to want to leave. You are in the South. Reconstruction is over. The plantation economy is in pieces. The carpetbaggers have gone home, and a new class of men in starched collars has arrived from Boston and Charlotte and Atlanta with a proposition. They are going to industrialize the South. They are going to bring progress. They are going to bring wages. They have surveyed the empty fields outside Greenville and Spartanburg and Birmingham, and they have done the math on how much it costs to build a 4-story brick textile mill, and they have done the math on how much it costs to staff one, and the second number only works if the staff is mostly children, so they make sure it is. Here is the trick, and you have to understand this trick, because it gets reused over and over for the next 80 years of American industry. The mill barons did not force children to work. They were far too clever for that. What they did was set the adult male wage at a number, say 50 cents a day, that could not, under any arithmetic ever invented, support a wife and 4 kids in a company-owned shack. The math simply did not close. So the wife went to the floor, then the oldest son went to the floor, then the second son, then the daughter, then the youngest, the one who was supposed to be in school, the one who was 6. By the time the family was hauling in enough scrip to eat, every set of hands in the household was inside the machine. It wasn't slavery. Slavery had a name. This one had a logo. The man you should know is Daniel Augustus Tompkins, textile baron, newspaper magnate, an engineer out of Edgefield, South Carolina, who personally designed dozens of the mills that ate the children of the Piedmont. Tompkins was not subtle. He wrote and published in actual newspapers the argument that putting white southern children inside cotton mills was morally improving. It taught discipline. It taught the value of work. It saved them. He wrote with a straight face, from the corruption of idleness. The mill, he said, was a kind of church. The Pelser Mill in South Carolina ran 6 days a week, 11 hours a day. The Avondale Mills in Alabama ran longer. Children started as doffers small enough to dart in between the spinning frames and yank off the full bobbins of yarn, replace them with empty ones, and dart back out before the frame restarted. Except the frame did not always wait for them to dart back out. Lewis Hine documented a boy named Giles Edmonds, age 12, who had been doffing since he was 7. Edmonds is in the photograph, staring at the camera with the dead eyes of a man 4 times his age, because in mill floor years, he is. Stand on the floor again. The air temperature is 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity is engineered to 90%. because dry cotton fiber snaps, and snapped fiber is a loss on the ledger. Your shirt is soaked through inside of 10 minutes. The lint floats. It is everywhere. It settles on your eyelashes, in the corners of your mouth, inside your ears. You breathe it in. It does not come back out. This is bisonosis, brown lung, and the cotton dust does not dissolve. It crystallizes in your bronchi and stays there. The doctor, a quarter-mile away in the company-owned clinic, will write consumption on your death certificate 40 years from now, because consumption doesn't get the company sued. The mangling. We have to talk about the mangling. The mill machinery had to be oiled and cleaned while running, because stopping the line cost money, and small hands were used for it, because small hands fit. The injury reports, when they were filed at all, describe scalpings, where a girl's long hair got caught in an overhead belt and her scalp was peeled off the bone. They describe degloved hands. They describe a 9-year-old in Augusta whose dress caught in the gear train and who was pulled through the machine before anyone could throw the brake. The mill paid the funeral expenses. The mill called it generosity. The owner attended the service and was photographed with his hat over his heart. Capitalism's piety, like its profit margin, was always strongest at the graveside. And you cannot leave. That is the next part nobody tells you. You cannot quit. You cannot walk out. You cannot put your kids in a wagon and try a different town, because the wages are not paid in money. They are paid in scrip company tokens, stamped with the company logo, redeemable only at the company store, which is the only store for 15 miles, which sells flour and lard and cornmeal at exactly the prices required to keep your balance just slightly below zero. You owe the store. The store owns the house. The house belongs to the mill. You do not have a job. You have a debt with a uniform. Now, and this is important, because the propaganda is still running. Do not let yourself believe this was a southern problem. The northerners had been running the same play for 50 years and just gotten quieter about it. Lowell, Massachusetts, Paterson, New Jersey, Fall River, the mill girls of New England, the Irish and French Canadian children, stacked 4 to a boarding house bed, breathing the same lint, losing the same fingers. The South didn't invent the mill town. It just inherited the blueprint and stripped out the few protections the Northerners had been embarrassed into installing. By 1900, the US Census counted roughly 92,000 children working in Southern textiles alone. The actual number was almost certainly half again that, because mill owners had a tidy habit of listing 12-year-olds as 16, 10-year-olds as 12, and 8-year-olds as helping the family, which is not a legal category, but it was not, in 1900, anyone's job to check. And here is the final knife, the part that should make you put down whatever you're drinking. The reformers of the era, the few who actually visited these mills with notebooks, came home and wrote that the children's eyes were the worst part, not the cough, not the missing fingers. The eyes, the flat, exhausted, finished look of a person who has already concluded at the age of 9 that there is nothing on the other side of the wall. But the mills had sunlight, at least. Filthy, lint-clogged, grey Carolina sunlight, but sunlight. The next layer down, the sun has never reached. 300 feet beneath Pennsylvania, in the anthracite seams of Lackawanna and Schuylkill, the children do not cough on cotton. They cough on something darker. Hold on. Stop the descent for a second. Look back at what we just walked through. A 9-year-old, scalped by a leather drive belt, in a mill her father could not afford to take her out of, owned by a man who genuinely believed he was saving her soul. Here is the question, and I want you to actually answer it in the comments, not scroll past it, not give me the easy answer, the hard one. If you had been Sadie Pfeifer's father in 1908, 50 cents a day, 4 kids, scrip wages, the company store breathing down your neck, would you have pulled her off that mile floor, or would you have signed the line and let her walk in? Be honest. There is no clean answer. That is the whole point. Drop your answer below. Hit the like button. Feed the algorithm with real history, because the version they taught you in school has a lot of gilding to scrape off, and we are only 1 floor down. The mine shaft is waiting. The mine shaft is waiting, and the mine shaft does not care that you are tired. You leave the south. You ride the rails north, past the slag heaps and the smelters, until the landscape itself turns black, black ground, black snow, black laundry lines, black water in the creeks. This is the anthracite region of Pennsylvania, Lackawanna County, Luzerne, Schuylkill, the hard coal seam that powered the trains and the foundries and the gaslit parlors of New York and Philadelphia, and beneath which, by 1900, a small army of children disappeared every morning at 6 and did not come back up until dark. The men who owned this place did not live here. They lived on Madison Avenue. The land was held by an interlocking cartel of railroads and coal operators, the Reading Coal and Iron Company, the Lehigh Valley Coal, the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, and the strings ran up, every last one of them, to J.P. Morgan's bank on Wall Street. Morgan did not visit the seams. He did not have to. He had men for that. Above ground, in the long wooden sheds that loomed over every colliery, sat the breaker. The breaker was the machine that crushed the raw coal into market-sized lumps and shook it down through a series of chutes. Inside the chutes, the coal poured past in a black river, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and bent over each chute, hunched at a 45-degree angle that would cripple the spine of a grown man. Inside a year sat the boys. You're looking at the breaker boys. They are 8 years old. Some of them are 6. Their job is to pick the slate and the rock out of the moving coal with their bare hands. They cannot wear gloves because the foremen have decided gloves dull a boy's sense of touch and slow the work. So the coal goes by, jagged and black and sharp, and the fingers go in, and the fingers come back out raw. Within a month of starting, every breaker boy has what the older miners called red tips, fingertips, ground down to bloody nubs, scabbed over each night ripped open again each morning. The boys learned not to cry about it. Crying was a slower form of suicide. Crying got you the broom handle because the foreman had broom handles or sticks, or, in some collieries, lengths of rubber hose weighted with shot. The breaker boss walked the chutes the way a slave overseer walked a cotton row. If your hand slowed, if you missed a piece of slate, if you reached up to wipe coal dust out of your eye, you got hit. There are mine inspector reports, the few honest ones that describe 12-year-olds with welts across their backs and the corners of their mouths split open from being struck across the face. You are inhaling, by the way, inhaling constantly. The air in the breaker shed is 40% coal dust by volume, and the dust is finer than flour, and it is going into your lungs to stay. This is anthracosis black lung, and we now know it begins in childhood and never reverses. By the time a breaker boy was 16 and old enough to be sent below into the actual mine, his lungs were already half gone. By 40, he was drowning in his own bed. The mining companies referred to this, when they referred to it at all, as miner's asthma, which is the kind of name you give a thing when you want it to sound like the weather. And the breaker boys, somehow, were the lucky ones, because below them, 300, 400, 600 feet down, in the actual seams, were the trapper boys. The trapper boys were 6 and 7 years old. Their job was to sit alone in absolute pitch darkness beside a wooden ventilation door and open it whenever a coal cart came rumbling through and close it after 10 hours, alone in the dark. The only light was the lamp on the cart. When the cart came, which was every 20 minutes or so, between carts, you sat, you listened, you counted rats, you waited. You also occasionally died, because the ventilation doors existed to control the flow of air, which existed to keep fire damp, methane gas, from accumulating. When the doors failed, or when a boy fell asleep at his post, the gas built up, and then a spark from a pickaxe lit the seam, and you can imagine the rest. Or you don't have to imagine. You can read the inquest from the Avondale mine disaster of the 6th of September 1869, in which 110 people died, including dozens of teenagers, after the only shaft caught fire and there was no second exit, because building a second exit cost money. You can read the twin shaft disaster at Pidston in June of 1896, when a roof collapse buried 58 men and boys alive, and the recovery teams gave up after a week and just sealed the tunnel. There are still bodies down there. Lewis Hine photographed the Ewan breaker at South Pidston in January 1911. The image is famous. 40 or 50 boys lined up at their chutes, coal blackened from the eyebrows down, the whites of their eyes the only thing visible. Hine had to bribe his way in. The foreman thought he was a salesman. Pay was 60 cents a day. Some operations paid less. The boys handed their pay envelopes, unopened, to their fathers, who handed them unopened to the company store. Meanwhile, Asa Packer, who founded the Lehigh Valley Railroad and the coal interests beneath it, died with a fortune of $54 million in 1879 money and a private college named after him. Mark Hanna, the Ohio coal and shipping baron, became William McKinley's kingmaker and effectively bought the 1896 presidential election with money pulled out of these same seams. J.P. Morgan, who consolidated the anthracite cartel in 1900, was, at that point, the single most powerful private citizen on the North American continent. Capitalism's pyramid scheme, except the bottom of the pyramid, was literally underground. Then came 1902. The mine workers walked out, 147,000 of them, including the breaker boys, including the trapper boys. The anthracite coal strike dragged on for 5 months, and as winter approached and the cities of the East started running out of heat, the operators were asked by reporters, by clergy, by a nervous White House, whether they might consider a compromise. The president of the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company, a man named George F. Baer, replied in a letter that has survived. He wrote that workers would be protected and cared for not by the labor agitators, but by the Christian men to whom God, in his infinite wisdom, has given the control of the property interests of the country. He meant it. Read it twice. He genuinely believed he had been appointed by the Almighty to own the coal under Pennsylvania, and that the 8-year-olds in his breaker sheds were part of God's portfolio. Theodore Roosevelt is credited with ending the strike. The textbooks like that story. What actually happened is that the operators agreed to a wage increase of 10% and a 9-hour day, and the question of child labor was not raised, not negotiated, and not addressed. The boys went back into the breakers the following Monday. They were still there, breathing the same black dust when the next decade began. The mines killed you, but at least they killed you quickly. A roof collapse takes 20 seconds. A fire damp explosion takes 2. There is a third floor, deeper than the mines, where the children were eaten alive an inch at a time by acid, by blades, by something with teeth, and the men who profited from it wore 3-piece suits and sat on the United States Supreme Court. Take another breath. You're going to need it. You're going to need it, because we are not in Pennsylvania anymore, and we are not even on the factory floor. We are about to discover that the factory floor was never the deepest part of this story. The deepest part was always the room directly above it, the one with the carpet and the brass nameplate and the leather chair, and beyond that, the room above that, all the way up to the marble bench in Washington, D.C. But first, the Gulf. It is 3 o'clock in the morning in Biloxi, Mississippi, October. The air smells like rotting shrimp and wood smoke and brine. You are 5 years old. Your name on the cannery roster is just Manuel. Lewis Hine took your photograph in 1911. You are standing in front of a wooden barrel that comes up to your shoulder, and your bare feet are on a concrete floor wet with shellfish slurry, and your job for the next 9 hours until the morning shift starts is to pick the meat out of cooked shrimp. The shrimp shells release an acid as they decompose. The acid eats your hands. By the end of week 2, your fingers are cracked open to the second knuckle, and they do not heal because they are never dry. The cannery foreman gives you a piece of cheesecloth and tells you to keep working down the coast in Bayou La Batre, Alabama. 4-year-olds shuck oysters with knives almost as long as their forearms. The knife slips constantly. The brine and the lemon juice and the cracked shell calcium powder go directly into the cup. Children develop infections, the doctors of the period called fish hand, a chronic, septic, weeping wound that never fully closes. By age 10, you have the hands of a leper. The owners of the Gulf canneries paid by the pound, not the hour. So a mother would bring her 4 children before dawn, prop them on crates, hand each one a knife, and try to make rent. The cannery did not technically employ the children. The cannery employed the mother. The children, the records say, were merely present. The legal fiction was beautiful, worthy of an Ivy League law review. Move inland now. Indiana, West Virginia, New Jersey, the glass factories. The temperature inside a glass furnace is 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hotter than the inside of a crematorium oven. The men who blew the molten glass into bottles and jars stood 8 feet from the furnace mouth, and the glass left the furnace on the end of an iron rod called a pontil, and somebody had to carry that rod, glowing, dripping, the length of the shop floor to the annealing oven where it cooled. That somebody was a boy, 10, 11, 12 years old. They were called carrying-in boys, and they made the run 14 times an hour, 8 to 10 hours a shift, between 2 walls of heat that scorched the eyebrows off their faces. Cataracts by 16 were universal. The glassworks knew this. The glassworks did not care, because cataracts at 16 meant a worker too blind to do anything but keep carrying glass, and a worker with no other options is a worker who does not ask for a raise. The night shift was preferred for children. Read that again. Preferred for children. The reasoning was clean. Production never stopped. The furnaces had to be fed around the clock, and night shift wages were a few cents lower. Adults negotiated. Adults complained. Children did neither. So the 11-year-old went on at midnight and came off at 10 in the morning, walked home in daylight he had not seen in 3 months, slept until 5, and went back. The invisible hand of the market, it turns out, had a switch in it, and it knew exactly where to hit a child. Then there were the newsies, and you've seen the Disney musical, and the Disney musical is a lie. The real newsboys of New York and Chicago and Street. Louis was 6, 7, 8 years old, and the older boys, the kings controlled the corners and beat the younger ones bloody for the prime spots. Many slept in doorways, many were trafficked. In July of 1899, several thousand of them went on strike against the 2 richest men in American media, Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, who had raised the price. The newsies paid per stack of papers and refused to take back unsold ones. The boys held out for for 2 weeks. The strike, against every probability, worked. The papers caved. Pulitzer's mansion on East 73rd Street, of course, remained standing. Now we come to the real horror. Not the floors, the ceilings. In 1904, a coalition of reformers founded the National Child Labour Committee, hired Louis Hine as their staff photographer, and began lobbying Washington. It took them 12 years to push a federal child labor law through Congress. The Keating-Owen Act passed in 1916. President Wilson signed it. It banned the interstate sale of goods made with child labor. 2 years later, the Supreme Court of the United States struck it down. The case was Hammer v. Dagenhart, 1918. The vote was 5-4. The plaintiff was a North Carolina cotton mill father suing on behalf of his 2 sons, 14 and 16, for the right to keep them in the mill. The court ruled that Congress had no constitutional authority to interfere. The majority opinion, written by Justice William Day, argued that allowing federal regulation of child labor would destroy the well-being of our country. The well-being of the country in 1918 evidently required the lungs of 9-year-olds. Congress tried again. The Child Labor Tax Act of 1919 imposed a federal excise on goods made by children. The Supreme Court struck that down too. Bailey v. Drexel Furniture, 1922, by a vote of 8-1. Twice in 4 years, the highest court in the country looked at the evidence, looked at the photographs, looked at Sadie Pfeifer, and ruled in favor of the mill. A constitutional amendment was proposed in 1924 to ban child labor outright. 36 states needed to ratify. 28 did. It was killed, state by state, by an unholy lobby of textile money, mining money. And this is the part nobody likes to mention: the Catholic Church, which feared federal authority over the family unit. The amendment was never ratified. It is, technically, still pending. 100 years later, pending. Meanwhile, in the towns themselves, the books were cooked. Children who died in industrial accidents were registered by company-paid coroners as having died of consumption or accidents at play or natural causes. A girl crushed by a loom at the Avondale Mills in 1910 went into the county records as having fallen from a chair. This was not unusual. This was procedure. Tammany Hall in New York, and the Pendergast machine in Kansas City, and the textile-funded state houses in Raleigh and Columbia took the mill money, killed the reform bills, and delivered the ballots that kept the whole circuit closed. And here is the part that should end the romance forever. Child labor in America did not end because the reformers won. The reformers lost. They lost in 1918. They lost in 1922. They lost in 1924. And they were still losing in 1932. Child labor ended because the Great Depression hit, and 12 million adult men became desperate enough to work for the wages that had previously been paid to children, and the mill owners, being neither sentimental nor stupid, simply switched out their workforce. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 is celebrated as the law that abolished child labor. What it actually did was ratify a transition the market had already completed. Morality did not win. Math did. The children were freed by an accountant. Quick check-in, 15 seconds. If you have made it this far, through the cotton lint, through the coal dust, through the courthouse, hit the like button right now. Not at the end, right now. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm to put this history in front of someone who still thinks the Gilded Age was Leonardo DiCaprio holding up a champagne flute, because we are about to enter the darkest part of this story. Not the factories, not the mines, not even the Supreme Court, the part where you find out where all that money is now. Stay with me, because here it is. The money did not disappear. The money never disappears. The money just changes its clothes. The Rockefeller fortune, built in part on the kerosene that lit those mill floors and the rail cars that hauled that coal, is still here. It funds museums in Manhattan. It funds a university in Chicago. It funds wings of hospitals named after men who never set foot inside a colliery. The Carnegie name is on libraries. Andrew Carnegie's apology to history, paid for in the steel that was rolled in mills where boys were maimed routinely. J.P. Morgan's bank is still on Wall Street, still trading, still solvent, still issuing press releases. The DuPont chemical empire is publicly listed. Pulitzer's name is now a prize for journalism. Hearst's name is on a building you have seen on television. Their great-great-grandchildren went to Choate. They went to Yale. They are on charitable boards. They have foundations named after them. They give speeches about inequality. They are, by every measure of American polite society, the good guys. Now say the name Sadie Pfeifer. You can't, can you? You didn't know it before today, and by next Tuesday you will have forgotten it again. There is no building. There is no scholarship. There is no foundation. There is no plaque outside the old mill in Lancaster, South Carolina, which is now, in the way of all such things, a brewery and an artisanal coffee shop and a co-working space with exposed brick. The bricks were laid by men who were paid in scrip. The floorboards were polished by the bare feet of girls who could not read. The Wi-Fi password today is probably welcome 1, 2, 3. This was never the Wild West of romance. There were no white-hatted heroes and no clean shootouts at high noon. There was just a lawless frontier of capital where the only sheriffs were the men hiring the deputies, and the only law was the depreciation schedule on a child's lungs. The cost of that frontier was never paid by the men who profited from it. It was paid by Sadie, and by Manuel, and by the trapper boys in the dark, and by the 110 dead at Avondale, and by every coroner's report that said consumption when it meant cotton dust. They paid it in full. They are still paying it. Their names are not on the receipt. So go back to the photograph, the one from the very beginning, the 8-year-old, the spinning frame, the bare feet on the greasy floor. Look at her one more time. The photograph you were never supposed to see isn't a window into the past. It's a mirror, and the gilding is starting to flake. If you made it to the end of this descent, all 5 floors, all the way to the bottom, drop one word in the comments. Just one. Type survived. Nothing else. We read every one of them, and we count. Then hit subscribe. The next episode of Grim Reality is already loaded, and the next layer of American history we are going to scrape the gold paint off of is darker than this one. We will see you down there.